Sure, yeah. And I suppose, finally the security deposit, just to speak a little bit about that and the absolute no-nos with respect to deposits, security deposits. A security deposit is taken at the beginning of the tenancy. It's a bond, basically. It's a security bond and should be treated as such. It's held in trust for the tenant for the duration of the tenancy, and that bond determines is refunded at the end of a tenancy if a tenant has kept the property in good condition, good order, and hands back the property in good order to the landlord, all of the inventory contents being in place and the conditions of the property agreed to be acceptable to the landlord. The deposit is handed back. But an absolute golden rule in my view is never ever let the tenant use the security deposit as a final month's rent or a rent payment in lieu, and landlords make that mistake all the time.
Yeah.
And as soon as they do that, what happens is the security deposit has been used up as a last month's rent. The tenant moves out, the landlord goes in and finds damages, or the property hasn't been cleaned properly, and there the landlord has no recourse. They've allowed the security deposit fund is used up as the last rent, so therefore the landlord ends up having to pay generally
out of their own pocket. Yeah, and that's a good point you just mentioned there. Cleaning. I mean, it's another major source of argument, let's say, and contention between tenants and landlords. So it's important, as we discussed previously when discussing certain things landlords should do. It's important that the landlord, should advise the tenant of what the procedure will be, how they expect it to receive back their property, and that a tenant is left in no uncertain terms aware of what their obligations are in that respect, because some tenants will walk out, they'll feel all the inventory items are there, the property is in good repair and good condition, but the oven mightn't be cleaned, the fridge mightn't be cleaned, the bathrooms mightn't be cleaned properly, and that's going to be a cost for the landlord to have that prepared for a new tenant, and that's what a deposit is for. So it's only fair to advise a tenant in advance what they should do and how they should leave the property. So again, it removes any contention at the time of checkout.
Sure, yeah. And one of the big things I found, when recently just had a case where everything checked off and the conditions seemed to be fine, and the new tenant moved in, and when the new tenant moved in, they rang us and said the vacuum cleaner wasn't working, that the parts, there was part of the hose missing, and there was a bit of the it's just it had been missed, so attention to detail is important too. That there's some things that landlords don't think about, but should. Attention to detail, I think, is important, because these are things that particularly the vacuum cleaner is locked away in a cupboard and it's rarely checked, if you like, but it can be a thing mightn't be working at all. It's been broken,
and that's a minor thing, but like you remember the story, we're going back a long time ago now, but back in the 90s, when a very prominent and affluent South Dublin parish had rented a property off a client of ours. We weren't managing the property, we didn't put them in there as tenants, but the landlord came to us 4 years after the tenancy had commenced to say they were moving out and would we re-let the property, and had not set foot in the property in those 4 years. Of course, he had a gilt-edged tenant, as anybody would be would assume, but unfortunately there's no guarantee of how a property would be kept. You can't legislate for human behaviour ultimately, and the house was in terrible condition, and a lot of the furniture just fit to be thrown out, had been damaged and way beyond what you would consider wear and tear, obviously. But that is something that could have been avoided if the landlord had himself, herself, or engaged somebody on their behalf to go in and carry out periodic inspections. It's so important. It's a vital part of a tenancy that you can see problems sometimes before they happen, or at least at an early stage of the problem, that it can be addressed appropriately. Because that was a significant cost for the landlord then to prepare the property again. There was a total refurbishment required at that point to prepare the property for reletting, which basically absorbed any good out of the rent they'd received over that period, and probably some of the rent over the following period as well.
Sure.
Diminishing returns and that. But look, that's a discussion for another day as well.
No, but it also reminds me you just reminded me of another case of a house in Blackrock, significant property, right? Where, and again, significant tenant paying significant rent, but we weren't looking after the property during the tenancy, but the landlord came to us at the end when the tenant was moving out and asked us would we handle the checkout of that tenant and re-let the property. So we did. We met the outgoing tenant, and I remember there was the most. I've never seen such a collection of art in the property. Huge, big paintings hanging on the walls. the tenant told me that at the time that, oh, there are paintings, we'll be taking them away. So I knew the size and extent of the paintings that, you know, when these come off the walls, there was, you know, so there was going to be need for extensive redecoration. So I said to the landlord when I left the property, I said, look, you know, this guy has a serious amount of paintings here. And he told me they're his, and he's going to be taking them away. And I said, you know, he'd actually had one taken down off the wall, and the fixings that I could see that when these things come out of the wall that it's going to be redecoration. So I said to the landlord, look, have you made provision for that in your lease? You know, for the property, for the tenant to make good when the paintings came down. And she said, oh yeah, no, I agreed with him. He told me he was putting up paintings, and I agreed with him that, you know, that was fine, you know. So it's fine. Tenant left. Looked for their deposit back, and of course there's all these big holes in the wall where all the paintings were. So I said to the tenant, well, look, we've conducted the checkout, and we've done an evaluation of the damages or making good, updating needed in the property, and it was a significant amount of money. It was, again, a significant property, so it was up in 3,500, I think, for the upgrade. So I went to the tenant and said, look, we'll be deducting this from your deposit because, you know, that's to. So he absolutely was shocked.
Not happy.
And he said, no. He said, I told the landlord that I was putting up the pictures, and she said that, you know, it's no problem, that, you know, she said she never made it clear in my lease that I'd have to pay for any upgrade to the property. That was never agreed. Classic case. I went back to the owner and I said, sorry, I said, do you have, you know, the agreement in writing you had with the tenant in relation to the upgrade of the property? The tenant is disputing the fact that he is responsible for this upgrade. And, you know, I said, have you got something in writing? To which she said, no, Breda, I don't. And I said, well, I'm very sorry, but I said, you know, if you proceed with this, my advice would be the landlord is going to be, the tenant is going to be very unhappy. You will end up probably in the PRTB, and I have to advise you, without your records and your
not a leg to stand on, effectively.
You haven't a leg to stand on.
And a lot of these agreements between landlords and tenants are done in good faith, and there might be a good relationship even in place, and the tenant might be in situ for some time, and, you know, these things are agreed in good faith. It's a business transaction ultimately, and you wouldn't do anything in business, you know, without having it recorded in writing, and this is the same. You know, it's both parties can agree something, they'll agree to put it in writing. If it's suitable to both parties should have it in writing. It just takes any contention out of the equation. Look, just to kind of recap, read on the major points, just to the no-nos, as we said from the outset. Do not enter into a tenancy agreement without preparing a proper inventory and condition statement of your property. Do not neglect your inspection rights as a landlord. You're entitled to enter your property for routine inspections periodically during the tenancy. Do not neglect to record any updates that might be required on the inventory or condition statement during your inspections. And likewise, at the end or tail end of the tenancy, you know, attend, conduct the checkout in person with the tenant, agree what had been, or review what had been agreed previously, and communicate with the tenant what you're dissatisfied with, if that is the case, and that there may be a deduction from the deposit, and if not, you know, refund the deposit in full, but it must be agreed with the tenant, and therefore take the contention out of the issue. But as Breed said, and I think it's a very important one, it's a very common one we see as well, is don't allow the tenant, irrespective of the relationship you have with your tenant, do not allow the tenant to use the security deposit as the last month's rent. There is no need for it. They signed up to pay you, maybe if it's a 12-month contract, 12 months rent. That's not 11 months rent and the deposit. It's 12 months rent. The deposit is a separate issue that is dealt with separately.
A bond, as I said.
A bond, yeah. It is to be refunded to the tenant unless there is reason to make deductions. But if you've allowed the tenant to use the deposit as the last month's rent, it may be too late to recover any costs you might incur thereafter, you know, in terms of remedy for any problems that might have arisen during the tenancy. So, look, I think that's sufficient. I think they're the main points in any case. There's far more we could sit here all day, Breed, but we've things to do.
Another day.
Yeah, another day. We'll leave it at that. If there's anything you think of based on what we've discussed here, any further questions you might have, don't hesitate to contact us. As always, email info@christiespmp.com or call 01 667 0099. Thanks again for watching.
And remember, advice is free.
Advice is free.
Okay.